Welcome back to Martial Arts in Chinese Literature and Films. Following last week's introduction of Confucianism, we'll discuss here another important school of thought in traditional China, Taoism. In our earlier lecture, we have mentioned that Tao means the way, or the way to truth. Since it basically means what is true or right, Tao is an essential concept in most philosophical schools, even though they construct their idea of Tao or truth differently. By naming itself after the Tao, of course, Taoism made an especially salient claim to the Tao. Furthermore, whereas other philosophical schools such as Confucianism defines their Tao mostly upon social and political considerations, Taoism's approach to Tao can be characterized as ontological and cosmological. That is, it claims to explain the fundamental nature of the universe and of everything that exists. The founding text of Taoism is Tao Te Ching. It's also commonly known as Lao Tzu, after the name of its putative author Lao Tzu. According to traditional accounts, Lao Tzu's surname was Li, and his given name was Another name he had is Li Dan. Lao Tzu, his epithet, literally means the old master. This title indicates his wisdom and mystique. It was said that Lao Tzu worked as a librarian at the royal court of Zhou, and thus had access to the writings of the legendary Yellow Emperor and other ancient classics. He was supposed to be a contemporary of Confucius, and was more senior than him. Reportedly, Confucius once visited Lao Tzu to inquire about the Western Zhou ritual system. This story appears in the Warring States Taoist classic Zhuangzi and became widely known during traditional China. Given the enigmatic nature of Tao Te Ching and the later religious transformations of Taoism, a set of mythical accounts emerged regarding Lao Tzu's life during traditional China. For instance, one legend says that he was born as an old man after spending 81 years in his mother's womb. In traditional Chinese cosmology, 81 symbolizes culmination, since it's the square number of 9, which stands for the apex of a development. Another popular legend about Lao Tzu is that he eventually left China and traveled westward on the Blue Ox. During the modern period, scholars have questioned the historicity of Lao Tzu. Either such a historical figure never existed, or he had little or nothing to do with the composition of Tao Te Ching. It's been proposed that Tao Te Ching was likely the work of multiple authors, and perhaps from different generations. The book likely took its present form during the late spring and autumn and the Warring States period. So Tao Te Ching has a mysterious origin, and even more so is its content. To begin with, the title Tao Te Ching is difficult to translate. Tao De commonly means morality and virtue, or the way and virtue. However, likely the term had different meanings as is used in the book's title. Modern scholars have proposed that virtue, or De, had the meaning of obtainment, similar to the other character De, this meaning power. For this reason, the book's title has been translated as The Way and Its Power. However, the book has been known among Western readers by its Chinese title Tao Te Ching, or according to an older spelling of the Chinese term Tao Te Ching. Indeed, Tao Te Ching is likely the best-known Chinese classic in the West. One estimate says that it has been translated into Western languages over 250 times, mostly to English, German, and French. According to one scholar, it is a famous puzzle which everyone would like to feel they had solved. We will soon see this puzzle-like quality in the text itself, and the numerous translations it has elicited indicates that it's likely untranslatable, and even incomprehensible. Moreover, its beauty and philosophy rest in this enigmatic quality, that is, to teach by evocation rather than comprehension. Tao Te Ching has 81 short chapters and about 5,000 characters total, so it's sometimes referred to as the text with 5,000 characters, 5,000言. Each chapter reads like a poem, and in fact has rhyming patterns and many parallel structures. Similar to poetry, they're highly evocative and use language creatively and unconventionally. Their meanings are often vague and paradoxical, opening to multiple possibilities of reading. With these contexts in mind, let's look at the famous opening lines of the first chapter of Tao Te Ching. The way can be followed, but not by the ordinary path. The name can be named, but not by the ordinary names. Nameless, it is the beginning of heaven and earth. Named is the mother of the myriad creatures. 道可道，非常道；名可名，非常名。无名，天地之始；有名，万物之母。You can recognize many characters in this passage after 1 year of studying Chinese. However, what do these lines actually mean? To begin with, the Chinese character Dao has multiple meanings. We have mentioned that it means the way, or more literally, the path or the road. At the same time, this character also has the meaning of to say something or to make a statement. Hence, this line can be understood as follows. The way can be spoken, but not by the ordinary language. Of course, it's difficult to pin down the exact meaning of these lines, but what they seem to suggest is that the true way is different from those in ordinary life. Moreover, if we take the double meaning of Tao into consideration, the language we use to express the Tao is different from the ordinary language. This would explain the unreadability of Tao Te Ching. In fact, one central argument of Taoism is the limitation of language. Since language is our essential tool to convey meanings and establish norms, its limitation indicates the imperfection of human perception and judgment. In addition to the idea of Tao, another important concept in this opening passage is that of the name, or Ming. To have a name is to have an identity. Name could also mean reputation, fame, as well as social roles and hierarchies. If we think of the names or identities of a king, a minister, a man, a woman, and so forth, the idea of the name applies to the natural world as well, such as when we identify a tree as a tree, a table as a table. By saying named, it is the mother of the myriad creatures. Tao Te Ching seems to acknowledge the validity of these roles and identities for distinguishing the myriad things in the world. However, we have to remember that the first principle it states is nameless, it is the beginning of heaven and earth. This statement indicates that in the world's most original and authentic form, there are no such distinctions. In this light, these distinctions and the hierarchy they determine are not essential. The Chinese term for nameless is wu ming, literally, no name or not having a name. The character wu can mean nothingness by itself. This character also defines a concept at the heart of Taoism, that is wu wei, non-action or not acting. However, rather than doing nothing at all, wu wei implies going with the flow and having no forceful actions. Wu wei is a complex concept that can have multiple ways of application. For instance, When applied to politics, it implies a laissez-faire government, a government that has minimum intervention on society. When applied to personal life, it implies a let-it-be attitude, or to detach oneself from the worldly gains and success, and to let go one's ego. On the philosophical level, it implies that everything is interdependent and constantly changing, so it's foolish to be fixated on specific goals or methods. Going along with the theme of our class, the power of emptiness, we'll see the presence of Taoist ideas centered on the idea of Wu, nothing, throughout our course materials. For instance, the protagonist of the film Hero is named Nameless, Wu Ming. In Kung Fu Panda, the protagonist Po's great master's name is a tortoise named Wu Wei, which sounds similar to both the Chinese word for tortoise, Wu Gui, and the Taoist term Wu Wei. To express its philosophy of nothingness, Tao Te Ching celebrates images of the void as those of a greater value, contrary to what we commonly perceive. For an example, let's take a look at the following passage. Clay is molded to form a vessel. There being nothing inside, the vessel is useful. Doors and windows are carved out to make a room. There being nothing within, the room is useful. While emphasizing the essential value of the void in the physical world, Tao Te Ching also proposes that the idea of the void is the highest principle of human wisdom and arts. For instance, one famous line from the book thus states, "The greatest music has few sounds, the greatest image has no shape. 大音希声，大象无形." The influence of the Taoist emphasis on emptiness can be clearly seen in traditional Chinese landscape paintings. These paintings often leave a significant portion blank in order to invite the viewer's active imagination and to create a more open-ended, expansive artistic effect. We'll see similar artistic principles in martial arts films such as Hero. To a large extent, Taoism's valorization of nothingness is a valorization of nature. In other words, it prompts us to overcome our desires and egos and feel integrated with the larger flows surrounding us. It also presents a yearning to return to simplicity and even to a primitive condition of being. According to the Taoist view, too much civilization and too many material objects are corrupting to the human mind. Therefore, one prominent type of cultural figure in the Chinese tradition is that of the Taoist hermit or recluse, who live away from civilization deep in the woods or mountains. Martial arts schools are strongly associated with Taoism and often represent this reclusive nature of Taoism. We'll certainly see these linkages later. To further introduce important aspects of Taoism, the philosophy of Wu or nothingness also means that Taoism is a philosophy of relativism. That is, all meanings are relative and limited. Hence, there is no absolute truth other than the fact that everything is constantly changing and interdependent on one another. One key principle underlying the relativism of Taoism is the complementarity of opposites. This is in fact the yin-yang principle you may already be familiar with. Likely, your understanding of yin-yang comes from this famous Taiji or supreme unity symbol, which characterizes the nature of the world in Taoism and in traditional Chinese thought in general. The dark part of the Taiji symbol symbolizes yin, and the light part symbolizes yang. Their twirling motion indicates the process of change. Furthermore, as you can see on this symbol, there is a little bit of yin in yang and a little bit of yang in yin. This pattern indicates their mutual dependency and transmutability. Then what is yin and what is yang? Simply put, they symbolize the dualism that constitutes the universe, that is, antithetical forces that coexist to constitute the whole and exist because of one another. In general, yang is associated with forces that appear to be dominant and active, and yin stands for what seems to be subordinate and passive. An obvious example is day and night, which can be corresponded to yang and yin. Gender is also expressed in terms of yin and yang, men being yang and women being yin, given the patriarchal nature of traditional Chinese society. Furthermore, the emphasis on nothingness in Taoism is related to a cyclical view of any development. That is, growth is always followed by decay, and power and success are always followed by their decline. By this philosophy, Taoism encourages us to accept the vicissitudes in life and warns us against greed and arrogance. Therefore, we must know when to stop and withdraw from our endeavors when they have reached their apex. We can sense this message from the following lines in Tao Te Ching. When gold and jade fill the hole, their possessor cannot keep them safe. When wealth and honors lead to arrogancy, this brings its evil on itself. When the work is done and one's name is becoming distinguished, to withdraw into obscurity is the way of heaven. In line with this relativist and paradoxical thinking, Taoism promotes the power of the weak. We can sense this principle from the following passage. The movement of the Tao by contraries proceeds, and weakness marks the course of Tao's mighty deeds. 反者道之动，弱者道之用。In Tao Te Ching, important metaphors for this power of the weak include the infant, woman, and water. We have mentioned that Taoism urges us to let go of our egos and be one with nature. The infant in Taoism represents the purity of nature. On this point, Taoism does converge with the thinking of Confucian philosophers such as Mengzi, as both sides agree on the original innocence in human nature. However, while Confucian thinkers are primarily concerned with the moral conscience, Taoism emphasizes a primordial state even before selfhood develops. As to the image of women in Taoism, due to women's subordinate role in traditional society, they became another metaphor of the power of the weak in Taoism. Moreover, women are also related to the idea of motherhood and are thus regarded as a generative force in Taoism. Furthermore, since Taoism challenges social conventions in general, the Taoist perspective on gender is less rigid comparing to Confucianism. For all these reasons, Taoism provides a cultural framework for portraying more positive or independent images of women in the Chinese tradition, as we shall see. Finally, Tao Te Ching presents the image of water as that of the Tao itself, as the following passage exemplifies. The highest excellence is like that of water. The excellence of water appears in its benefiting all things, and in its occupying without striving to the contrary the low place which all men dislike. Hence its way is near to that of the Tao. 上善若水， 水善利万物而不争，处众人之所恶，故几于道. According to this passage, water resembles Tao in its humility, its selflessness, while being beneficial to all others. In other passages, Dao De Jing portrays the power of water as being the softest yet also the strongest, since it can transform landscapes over time, but nothing can change water, which can take on different forms by itself. In the words of Dao De Jing, there is nothing in the world softer and weaker than water, and yet for attacking things that are firm and strong, there's nothing that can prevail over it, and there's nothing which can change water. 天下莫柔弱于水，而攻坚强者莫之能胜，其无以易之。In these ancient passages from Dao De Jing, we can sense the philosophical root of Bruce Lee's famous Be Water quote. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. You put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. We'll certainly revisit this idea and explore its modern implications. Now, having spent some time discussing Dao De Jing, the founding text of Taoism, let's briefly introduce another famous Taoist book, Zhuangzi, which was mainly written by the Warring States philosopher Zhuang Zhou. Earlier on, we have read the story of Swords from the outer chapters of Zhuangzi. We have mentioned that of Swords likely belongs to later additions to Zhuangzi, not written by Zhuangzi himself. Here, we'll look at a few famous passages from the inner chapters of Zhuangzi, passages that represent core ideas in Zhuangzi's thought. One prominent theme in Zhuangzi is spiritual freedom, whereas Dao De Jing reveals that Tao exists beyond social conventions. Zhuangzi emphasizes that an individual should cultivate this transcendent mindset in order to achieve Tao. To manifest this philosophy, Zhuangzi's opening chapter presents the fantastic fable of a giant fish transformed into an eagle. As the passage goes, in the Northern Ocean there is a fish, the name of which is Kun. I do not know how many li in size. It changes into a bird with the name of Peng, the back of which is also I don't know how many li in extent. When this bird rouses itself and flies, its wings are like clouds all round the sky. When the sea is moved so as to bear it along, it prepares to remove to the Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean is the pool of heaven. In this fable, the fantastic size of the fish and the eagle challenges the limits of our imagination, and the transformation experienced by the fish-eagle connotes the Taoist philosophy about the fluid boundaries between all beings. In general, we may think of this magical creature as a symbol for those with a mindset that transcends the material gains of this world, for there is a much greater world they yearn for and belong to. In another famous passage, Zhuangzi even questions the validity of the material world we're experiencing. That is, he asks if life is like a dream. For this idea, let's read this passage that portrays Zhuangzi's transformation into a butterfly in his dream. Formerly, I, Zhuang Zhou, dreamed that I was a butterfly flying about, feeling that it was enjoying itself. I did not know that it was Zhou. Suddenly I awoke and was myself again, the veritable Zhou. I did not know whether it had formerly been Zhou dreaming that he was a butterfly, or it was now a butterfly dreaming that it was Zhou. This is likely the best-known dream passage in the Chinese tradition. The image of the butterfly is related to beauty and freedom. As a creature of metamorphosis, it also evokes the idea of transformation, which is central to Taoism. In questioning if this life is but a dream, and if this self is but an illusion, Zhuangzi again argues against limiting one's imagination and aspiration to this world. Zhuangzi is a fascinating text full of fables of the kinds we have read. However, in the interest of time, we can only include in this lecture these few examples as an exemplification of his ideas. Here, to draw some connection between Taoism and Confucian principles we have introduced earlier, we may easily see how different they are from one another. Confucianism in general upholds the social order and has a strong sense of right and wrong, whereas Taoism questions social conventions and underscores the relativity of values. Confucianism focuses on one's understanding of and devotion to this world. Taoism focuses on one's understanding of and devotion to the other world. However, beyond differences, Confucianism and Taoism have overlapping features. Most importantly, they're both idealist philosophies and demand one's detachment from material gains. In Confucianism, this anti-materialist tendency is best expressed through the principle of Yi or integrity, which requires an individual to sacrifice material expediency and even one's life for a higher cause. Taoism, from another perspective, postulates that a greater world exists elsewhere and outside material forms, and therefore it's delusional to attach oneself to materialist goals. On this point, we may observe how both philosophies speak to the theme of our class, the power of emptiness, and will continue to trace these connections throughout the semester. In traditional China, Confucianism and Taoism coexisted as major intellectual frameworks. While Confucianism gained a more official status and became the leading philosophy in imperial politics, Taoism had a huge impact on fine arts, social life, and folk religion. Since around the 1st century, Buddhism entered China. The teaching on nirvana and nothingness in Buddhism resonates with Taoism in significant ways. Due to these similarities, Buddhism became thoroughly integrated in Chinese culture, insomuch that Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism came to be known as three teachings, or Sanjiao in traditional China. We'll look at Buddhism more closely in later lectures, especially when we study the classical novel, The Journey to the West. Here we conclude our lecture on the topic of Taoism. There is another lecture video for this week, so please keep watching. In the other video, we'll talk about legalism and its connection to the rise and the fall of the Qin dynasty.